So, if you didn't hear, after going on a massive acquisition spree for years on end, Microsoft has suddenly decided to close many studios. In this specific case, it's the house of ZeniMax or Bethesda-owned studios, or at least what was the ZeniMax Bethesda Studio collection before they were fully acquired by Microsoft in 2021. There are 4 specific studios that have been closed. Tango Gameworks, which is best known for The Evil Within and Hi-Fi Rush, Arcane Austin, which is responsible for the games Prey and Redfall. There's also Roundhouse Games and AlphaDoc Studios, but neither of them have really released any quintessential games that most people would recognize. Now, the reason I'm choosing to make a video about this even days after the news broke is because I want to talk not so much about the studio closures and the fact that it's just happening. I want to specifically focus on why are studios allowing themselves to be acquired, especially when this outcome seems to be happening very frequently, and why do the people who buy up studios end up closing them not long after they purchased them? Now, getting a good answer to those questions requires a bit of breakdown, but I'm also not going to bury the lead. Simply put, it's business model. A model that doesn't focus on product, it doesn't focus on service, it focuses purely on profit margin. That's really all it boils down to. But if you want more explanation than that, let's start with why a studio would allow themselves to be acquired in the first place. There are 2 primary reasons why a studio would want to be acquired. The first reason boils down to studio ownership. Do the people who run the studio actually want to continue working on it? Or maybe they're just greedy. Usually, when a studio is first acquired, there is an initial payout with a not insubstantial amount of the funds going to the people who actually run the studio. Typically, there's also some sort of a clause saying that the people who run the studio have to stick around for a while. And that's really more or less what we've seen happen several times over. For instance, with Pete Hines, the president of Bethesda Softworks. Not Bethesda Game Studios. They are 2 different entities. He announced his departure from the studio roughly 1 to 2 years after Microsoft completed the initial acquisition. So that's your first reason. Simple as can be, somebody running the studio got a payout whenever it was bought, and they have to stick around for just a little bit of time. I don't know that that's actually what happened with Pete Hines, for instance, but it was certainly within the window of possibility. Now, for your second potential reason that a studio might want to be acquired. It is difficult to keep a studio, or any business for that matter, afloat and always bringing in enough money, especially any sort of business that is artistically driven, which video games absolutely are. I can speak from this from a personal perspective. I've run a YouTube channel for more than a decade, and once upon a time, I had a choice about whether or not to build out my entire operation to make it grow. I never did that because it's terrifying to imagine a YouTube channel being your sole source of income, and YouTube channels falter all the time. The only thing worse than that would be growing a channel out and making it the sole source of income for a lot of people. So all of a sudden, if that channel starts to falter, oh my God, it's not just me, it's now a whole bunch of other people who are also losing their livelihood. That is terrifying. Now imagine that you're a video game company. You have tons of people relying on the ability of the studio to actually bring enough money in from every single game release to cover the expenses of things like rent, utilities, worker pay, worker benefits, the coffee machine in the break room. Trust me, you can't run a business without a coffee machine. That's a lot of money that you have to constantly look for. And if a game is an utter flop, well, you are in very serious trouble, and you have to constantly be trying to find the funding to make the studio stay afloat, and everybody's livelihood is based around that. It is tiring to remain independently funded and constantly gamble on whether or not your next new project is actually going to be a success. A studio can end up releasing middling game after middling game just because it's safe instead of working on big grand art projects. And what artistic person wants to work at a studio that just plays it safe? So, if a company comes along and says, hey, you're really valuable, we want to buy you, you no longer have to worry about figuring out the money situation, we'll handle that. You just do what you do best, make the games. That sounds like an absolute win, especially if you're the person running the studio and you're pulling your hair out trying to keep it funded, and there's a bonus payout specifically for you because you're being bought out. So that's your second reason for why a studio might want to be acquired. It's literally selling the stress of financial management, so you no longer have to deal with it. But now we have to talk about the other side of the coin. Why would any company want to buy a studio and then close it? The answer to that, as stated earlier, is a profit-driven business model. You see, an independent production house, their main focus is producing a product. That product, in this case, is a video game. If they make a good product, then they make good money. But that doesn't always pan out. As we all know, there are sleeper hits all over the place that just don't earn as much as they really deserve. So, from an independent or privately run and not publicly traded studio's perspective, their focus is the product. But from a large company's perspective, which is publicly traded, the focus is profit. Profit, profit, profit. What do you sell? I don't know. Is it making money though? Because that's all I care about. That's really what a lot of this boils down to. We vaguely have to get into the weeds on how business acquisitions operates to understand why Microsoft bought ZeniMax Media and what in totality it meant for them. So, for all of the potential reasons already covered, ZeniMax Media wanted to sell themselves to be owned by a larger operator. The purchaser just so happened to be Microsoft. So what Microsoft does is they come up and they say, here's some money. This is what we want to buy you for. And these are the terms under which you end up being acquired. ZeniMax Media takes the money. The sale is complete, and now everything that ZeniMax owned belongs to Microsoft. And I don't just mean what they make. I mean everything. First, it means that Microsoft now owns ZeniMax bank account, but that's not all. Now, Microsoft owns the physical assets, the computers, the desks, all of the art, all of the software that was produced. Microsoft also owns all of the intangible assets, the ideas that you can only think in your mind and you can't get your hands on. The concept of the Elder Scrolls, the story of the Fallout universe, the gunplay mechanics of the Doom universe, Wolfenstein, Dishonored, you name it, Microsoft owns it. And don't forget, accounting comes with all of this. And those three things make up what the studio is actually worth. The bank account, whose value is obvious, the physical assets that people need inside of an office, which can be valued fairly easily, and the thoughts and intellectual properties, which are much more difficult to value, but they still get a dollar amount put on a piece of paper. You total all of that up, and that is what Microsoft bought. So on a balance sheet, they didn't buy a company, they bought a bank account, assets, and ideas. And that theoretical value is what allows Microsoft to turn around and look at their shareholders and say, look, the company has grown. Now we have to start talking about larger market trends, specifically the way that publicly traded American companies tend to operate based on what is expected of them whenever they are traded on the open stock market. At current, and for some time now, companies traded on the open market have been focused on one thing above all else: growth, growth, growth. And the general consensus from one company to the next is that if you aren't growing, then you are failing. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how much you grew last quarter. You'd better be growing this quarter. Well, it turns out a relatively easy way to make a company look like it's still growing is to perform a Frankensteinian type of surgery. Take other companies and stitch them onto you. Look, now I've grown. Everybody can see that, right? In short, acquisitions. So it looks on the balance sheet like Microsoft has grown because they bought a bunch of valuable studios. The growth of the company influences the value of the stock on the open market. When the value of the stock goes up, it makes the shareholders happy. I want line go up. So the total revenue of the company has gone up. Just so you know, revenue is the total amount of money that a company brings in before you subtract out what you had to spend to make that money. So revenue is up, stock price go up. Now the shareholders are looking for dividends. A dividend is a fixed amount of money given out for each share owned in the company. Usually this quantity is quite small. For this reason, you typically need a lot of shares to get any meaningful amount of money for ownership in the company. Naturally, those dividends will be higher if the stock price is up. And the best way to influence stock price is to show growth. And that growth only needs to be shown in larger revenue for the company, whether or not you created a new product or not. In other words, acquire companies to make it look like you're making more money and thus pay out more money to the individual shareholders. Now, the important question: what did the shareholders do to earn that money? Nothing. No, seriously, they didn't do anything. They just held a share. They didn't have anything to do with operations. They didn't work a 9 to 5. They didn't put their nose to the grindstone. They didn't come up with a product. Nothing. Oh, by the way, all those dividends that they're paying out to the shareholders, where do you think the money came from for them to be able to actually shell that out? The bank accounts of the studios that they acquired. But as we all know, infinite growth is literally impossible. It is the antithesis of a natural process. So, what happens if the company doesn't quite make as much as they did this quarter than they did last quarter? I'm not even talking about losing money. I'm just talking about making slightly less. I'm actually going to quote some numbers for you here. Microsoft Corporation for the final quarter of 2023 made just over $62 billion. Now again, that's revenue, the money before you subtract out what you had to spend to make everything. But that's $62 billion. Now, how much did Microsoft Corporation make for March, first quarter of 2024? $61.82 billion. So basically, they made a fractional amount less, and now line don't go up. How do we fix this? Less expense, reduce how much we're spending. Close studios. People will hear that you're saving money. It doesn't work that way on the balance sheet, but you're not talking to the balance sheet. You're using the balance sheet to try to talk to the market. You're using the balance sheet to try to talk to the shareholders. So if you shutter studios, regardless of how well they've been operating, people hear about that in headlines. They're saving money. Line go back up. That is really all it boils down to, and I know that I just engaged in a long-winded explanation of something remarkably simple, and there are an infinitesimal number of ways to make this topic complicated, to make it sound like the company is not at fault, make it sound like the market is not the problem, but there is a continuous, rigorous, and extreme obsession with infinite growth, and if there is no growth, then it is a sign of being unhealthy, when the exact opposite is the case. The company needs to be mature. It needs to be stable. It does not need to be infinitesimally growing. And what Microsoft is doing right now is a symptom of the market demand that it always be growing. The minute that it started to pull back, the minute that it made a fraction of less money this quarter than it did the last quarter, all of a sudden it starts to cut pieces of itself off in an effort to make it look like it's still growing. Hey, look, I'm not necessarily bigger because I just cut off an appendage, but I am more lightweight. That doesn't make any sense, and it's not a healthy way to run a business. That is literally how Microsoft is showing its growth, gobbling things up and then disposing of them. And this has been happening across the market at large with lots of different companies. It's only just now that it's started to show itself in a significant capacity in the video game market. Infinite growth is not possible. Nothing naturally grows forever. And until the market learns that, we are going to continue seeing these types of purchases and then closures, because the purpose is not for the benefit of the studios that are being bought. It is for the purpose of benefiting shareholders on the open market. That's all it comes down to. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening. I am, of course, William Strife, and if you didn't know before, it turns out that I have a bit of a soft spot for economics and market motions and all of that type of wonderful, boring business information. But hey, if you found this interesting or informative, go ahead, hop down to the comments and tell me what you think. Have a discussion down there. Hey, get into a fight down in the comments with other people. That actually results in like feeding the algorithm and puts my video out in front of more eyes. Actually, I'm kind of encouraging you guys to do something bad. How about you don't do that? Anyways, hit the like button maybe, and tell me whether or not you want to see more videos like this. I'll see you next time. Bye.